I would like to start by talking about bagels. When I was growing up in Nsukka, the university town in southeastern Nigeria, books were the center of my world. I started reading when I was perhaps 4 years old, and I read everything I could find. One day, I read an American novel in which a character ate something called a bagel for breakfast. I had no idea what a bagel was, but I thought it sounded very elegant, very exotic. I pronounced it Bagel. I desperately wanted to have a Bagel. My family visited the United States for the first time when I was 9, and at the airport in New York, I told my mother that as a matter of the gravest urgency, we had to buy a Bagel. And so she went to a cafe and bought one. Finally, I would have a Bagel. You can imagine my disappointed surprise when I discovered that this Bagel, this glorious Bagel from the novel, was only just a dense donut. Still, even though a bagel ended up not being some sort of exquisite confection, the moments in which I thought it was were well worth it, because my imagination soared in delight. And there was something comforting and instructive in that discovery of a bagel, in the demystifying ordinariness of a bagel. Other people like me ate boring food. I have since, by the way, come to enjoy a toasted bagel with cream cheese. But I wanted to use this anecdote not only to illustrate the wondrous ability of books to enlarge our imaginations, but also as a starting point to make a case for the kind of literature that I was drawn to and that I continue to be drawn to as a reader and as a writer. I have been writing since I was old enough to spell. My writing, when it is going well, gives me what I like to describe as extravagant joy. And when it is not going well, is a source of great depression and anxiety. I write because I have to. I write because I love the solitude of writing. Because I love the near mystical sense of creating characters who sometimes speak to me. Because I love the possibility of touching another human being with my work. Because I spend a large amount of time in the spaces between the imaginary and the concrete. Writing, we are often told, is a solitary endeavor, and it is. It is also intensely idiosyncratic. Each time I read of or hear about a writer's elaborate writing ritual, I am immediately tempted to claim an equally elaborate ritual of my own. To claim that I light red candles or hold improbable yoga positions or recite an Igbo chant or fall into a brief trance before I actually begin to write. But although my ritual is in truth significantly less colorful than what I wish it were, it does exist, as I suspect it does for every writer. There is an Igbo proverb that says, "Onye na-akwa nka na-adu iru," which translates loosely to, "A sculptor always works with a frown." This suggests that the sculptor, and by extension the artist, the writer, the creative person, walks in a state of the utmost seriousness and rigor, because her vocation, her calling, is not entirely in her control. She is a conduit of sorts, communing with something larger than herself, hence the frown. Now, I don't walk with a frown, at least not all the time, but I do think of my writing as both magic and craft. It is a whispering from the spirits, an inexplicable gift I have been blessed with. And it is also a steely determination to sit down for hours and write and rewrite until the muscles of my neck and shoulders tighten in painful revolt. My family and I often joke about how, when I am home and all is quiet and all distraction turned off, and I'm supposed to be writing, I am instead wandering around the house, from study to bedroom to kitchen and back again. Which brings to mind a wonderful quote from the American writer Don DeLillo. Writers go out of their way to secure their solitude, and then, having secured it, they go out of their way to squander it. But that wandering is itself part of the magic and craft process. And the hope is that at some point in the wandering, the literary spirits will intercede, the story or a character will reveal itself, and I will then be able to sink into the hours of writing and rewriting, fully inhabiting an intense inward space. But it is too simple to claim that writing is a private act, end of story. If it were so, I would write in a diary and put it away in a drawer. An audience, or the possibility of an audience, moves writing from a private to a public space. I have often been asked who my audience is, who I write for. And the most honest answer is that I really do not know, because I never consciously think of audience while writing fiction. I sometimes also wonder whether it ever occurred to Turgenev that a teenager in a small town in southeastern Nigeria might be part of the audience of Fathers and Sons, his novel about 1860s Russia, which I love. I don't suppose it did occur to him. Perhaps a more comprehensible answer to the question about who my audience is that I write the kind of fiction I like to read, and so I write for whoever enjoys the kind of fiction I enjoy. As a child, books about hobbits or flying saucers or alternative universes did not interest me. Perhaps because at some level I was always in awe of the vastness of the world, of the many places I was yet to learn about, of the millions of ordinary human stories yet untold, each one worthy, each one capable of truth and beauty. And so I was particularly drawn to books that I like to call realist literature, books populated by recognizably real human beings living in real places. Of course, one must use the word real with some reservation. The world of realist literature is not the same as the real world, but it is close enough, aligned enough to the real world to be able to illuminate it. And it is books of that sort that I would like to make a case for today. Books that have often brought to my mind the words of the ancient Latin poet Horace. The role of literature is to instruct and delight. Realist fiction is not merely the recording of the real, as it were. It is more than that. It seeks to infuse the real with meaning, which perhaps is why the artist walks with a frown. As events unfold in our lives, we do not always know what they mean. But in telling the story of what happened, meaning emerges, and we are able to make connections with emotive significance. Realist fiction is, above all, the process of turning fact into truth. I knew the basic facts of Nigerian history when I first read Chinua Achebe's novels, Things Fall Apart and Arrow of God. But it was those novels that made me realize that while I may very well know the facts, I did not really know the truths. Bloodless words like pacification and amalgamation and indirect rule were the facts. But the truths were in the human stories. A respected man being flogged publicly by agents of the colonial government. A priest, once resplendent in his pride and his stubbornness, now reduced to sitting on a cold prison floor because he had dared to reject an offer from a British district officer. And in images such as these, I learned a great truth which the history books said nothing about: the loss of dignity. One of my favorite novels is The Dark Child by Kamaralaye, a book of startling beauty defiant optimism, and the most layered nostalgia. On recently rereading it, I was struck by a sentence in the introduction by the South African English writer William Plummer. Plummer wrote, "Laie introduces us to a society which appears entirely free of vulgarity." The assumption, of course, being that the society should have been vulgar. Now, this is a silly comment, if ever there was one, but if we are willing to overlook the silliness of it, we see that Plummer might have been knowledgeable about the so-called facts of what he calls tribal life. But it took this novel, this beautiful novel about a quiet childhood in the plains of Guinea, to make him see the truths. Most of us know the story of the philosopher Diogenes the critic, who, carrying a lantern in daylight, walked up and down the streets of Athens and claimed that he was looking for an honest man. Scholars say that Diogenes did in fact carry a lantern around Athens' sunlit streets, but he did not say that he was looking for an honest man. What he said was that he was looking for humanity. Of course, the cynicism of his action is clear. The lantern in daylight tells us that he does not believe he will find this humanity. But it can also be interpreted as his refusal to take the idea of humanity for granted, because humanity is, in fact, something we must always keep searching for. To read realist literature is, I think, to search for humanity, as Diogenes did, but hopefully with much less cynicism. It is easy to assume that our collective humanity is self-evident, that we do not need to search for it. But we live in a time of numbers and facts, in a world where an acceptable response to the news of a death is to click the like button in Facebook. We live in a world where we can easily find information about GDP and infant mortality and life expectancy, but not about that which most motivates people, human desire. We live in a world where we so often quote figures of the number of the dead in Iraq and Afghanistan and Congo until they become just that, figures. Each time I read these news articles, I find myself thinking, what do they dream about in Congo? How do they fall in love in Afghanistan? How do they resolve family quarrels in Iraq? What do they like to eat? Of course, we must know about the dead and the dying. And of course, these figures and facts are essential. But they should coexist with human stories. We should know how people die, but we should also know how they live. When we read human stories, we become alive in bodies not our own. Literature is in many ways like faith. It is a leap of the imagination. Both reading and writing require an imaginative leap, and it is that imaginative leap that enables us to become alive in bodies not our own. It seems to me that we live in a world where it has become increasingly important to try and live in bodies not our own, to embrace empathy, to constantly be reminded that we share with everybody in every part of the world a common and equal humanity. But I must hasten to clarify that I am not suggesting that we are all the same. We most certainly are not. Many of us would be reluctant to live in a world in which everyone were the same. We would be suffocated by boredom. Literature is indeed about how we are different. The American writer John Updike, after reading Chinua Achebe's Arrow of God, wrote to Achebe to say that a Western writer would not have allowed the destruction of a character as rich as the protagonist, Ezulu. Perhaps what Updike had implicitly understood was that in Achebe's world, very different from the Western world depicted in the literature with which Updike was familiar, the preservation of the community mattered more than the preservation of the individual. Or, in the words of a character in the novel itself, an animal rubs its itching flank against a tree, but a man asks his kinsman to scratch him. This is part of realist literature's magic, that we are able to thrill to the magnificent diversity in the world. And so we read not to see how other people are like us, but simply to see them, to truly see them, what they love, what they resent, what wounds their pride, what they aspire to. Yet, part of that magic of realist literature is to remind us of how similar we are in the midst of our differences, to remind us that what we all share is the quest for value. To be human is to want to be valued. We want our bodies to be nourished, and we want our hearts to be nourished. And this is the humanity we must seek through stories. I fell in love with Sri Lanka after I read Ramesh Gunesekera's beautiful novel, Reef, with its evocation of friendship, love, and politics in a country about to be torn apart by war. Recently, I visited Sri Lanka, and at the airport in Colombo, I saw a collection box which said something like, "Contribute money to help the soldiers." I was not quite sure which soldiers this fundraising was for, whether the government or the Tamil Elam, but it did not matter much to me because
welcome back again, brothers and sisters, kings and queens. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. It's about her that today we're going to talk about. Briefly, I'm going to talk about who she is, what she advocates for, and what she stands for, what she has exactly stood for. In fact, it's very clear, very logical, very obvious that she has always stood for who she is, her position, especially as an African in other countries in the West. Now, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, time and time again, has turned the tables by trying to be a realist. She talks about good books are fiction narratives, especially for those things like flying saucers, like away from what exactly you're able to interact with. She talks about that realist literatures are those people who are writing about content or the things that they interact with day in, day out. And given the fact that you see she hails from Africa, but again finds herself in a land whereby she's seen as an exotic or as somebody who is totally different, trying even to blend in by meticulously trying to remind them, everybody seeks for this particular, there's a quest for everybody for the value of humanity. But then Chimamanda again, time and time, there is a time whereby she talked about how racism and also the well-meaning pity that is always, extended to the Africans, especially if you land in either the USA or any other country that is not in Africa, that you'll be seen and pitied like, hey, we're very sorry. Literally, there is that particular kind of, thing that, oh, you come from Africa. We know that Africa is a land of, beautiful landscapes and beautiful animals with senseless people dying from senseless wars, diseases, and such kind of things. So the West being stereotyped about the Africans. And of course, how esteemed maybe the Africans who come from Africa see the other countries. Just as she just used that particular anecdote of a bagel, thinking that it was something that is exquisite, but literally she learned out that it was just a simple, dense donut. Now, guys, I feel like the sense of humanity, as she's trying to put it out there, is that everybody, there's a quest for everybody trying to add value in their life. But at this particular point, guys, I'm going to patch it at that particular point, and do drop me your comments on the comment section. Let me know exactly what you think of this particular video and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And there's more for Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And in case you bumped across the particular channel, guys, we keep on reminding ourselves on where the roots, our roots, where we are coming from, and the true authentic value that is embedded within us and Africans at large. So, and especially the Africans in the diaspora, if this one happened to come across your door, a thumbs up, guys, up there. It won't hurt you, it won't do you and won't do you any harm. And of course, share this particular work with those particular with people that you know that this work will add value to their, you know, lives. Above all, let's unite for one big Africa. Cheers.